He called her an outdated symbol, implying her presence glorified outdated militarism. She remained calm, but 2 hours later, 400 veterans appeared, forming a silent wall around City Hall. That message was louder than any speech. The morning sun filtered through Maplewood's oak-lined streets as Rebecca Hayes, a woman in her mid-50s, stepped off the bus. 8 years had passed since she'd last walked these familiar sidewalks. The town looked both familiar and foreign. New storefronts replaced old establishments, and fewer American flags adorned the lampposts than she remembered from childhood. Rebecca, whose skin was weathered and aged, with a slight hunch in her posture, adjusted her simple blazer, making sure it covered the edge of her prosthetic left arm. The Medal of Honor, her nation's highest military decoration, remained in its case at the hotel. She'd earned it in Afghanistan in a firefight that claimed 3 of her closest friends and left her permanently changed. The official citation mentioned conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at risk of life, but Rebecca, with her kind, pitiable expression, preferred simpler terms. She'd protected her people. Nothing more, nothing less. She wore plain, practical clothing, far from ostentatious. The town council's invitation to speak at the Memorial Day ceremony had arrived unexpectedly. Rebecca had spent years avoiding public appearances, preferring the quiet rhythm of her Colorado apartment and her work with veteran support groups. But something about returning to Maplewood, where generations of her family had lived before her, felt necessary. "Well, I'll be damned," called a gruff voice from Finnegan's Market. Rebecca Hayes back in the flesh. Old Joe Finnegan stood in the doorway, white apron stretched across his barrel chest. His hair had gone completely gray, but his smile remained unchanged. "Mr. Finnegan," Rebecca said, feeling a genuine smile form. "Still keeping this town fed. Someone's got to do it." He wrapped her in a brief but fierce hug. "Your grandfather would be proud. Damn proud." Rebecca nodded, fighting unexpected emotion. "Thanks. You speaking at the ceremony tomorrow?" "That's the plan." "Good. About time we had someone worth listening to." He nodded respectfully. "Stop by later. Annie made those oatmeal cookies you used to steal when you thought I wasn't looking." As Rebecca continued down Main Street, she noticed the subtle shifts in people's gazes. Some recognized her immediately, expressions shifting from curiosity to recognition, then admiration or discomfort. Others simply saw a woman with a careful gait and one sleeve that hung differently. At the corner cafe, a silver-haired woman waved enthusiastically. Martha Collins had been Rebecca's high school history teacher and apparently still remembered her. "Rebecca," Martha called, gesturing to an empty chair. "Join me, please." Rebecca sat gratefully. "Good to see you, Mrs. Collins." "It's Martha now. You've earned that." She leaned forward. "The whole town's talking about your return. Good things, I hope." Martha's expression tightened slightly. "Mostly, though, I should warn you, Mayor Jackson has different ideas about patriotism than your grandfather's generation." "Different how?" "He's built his platform on what he calls progressive civic values. Wants to rebrand Maplewood as forward-thinking." Martha stirred her tea. "Not that there's anything wrong with progress, but he tends to view military tradition as outdated." Rebecca absorbed this silently. She'd faced worse than a small-town mayor with modern sensibilities. "He's speaking before you tomorrow," Martha continued. "Just so you're prepared." "I appreciate the heads-up." Rebecca glanced toward the town square where workers were setting up chairs. The memorial statue of a World War II soldier stood at attention, weathered by decades of Maplewood seasons. "But I'm not here to make waves," she said softly, "just to honor those who didn't come home." Martha squeezed Rebecca's hand. "And that's precisely why we need voices like yours." That evening, Rebecca walked through the cemetery where her grandfather rested. She traced the engraved words, noting his service in Vietnam. The old soldier had raised her after her parents died, teaching her about duty long before she'd enlisted. "I'm back," "Grandpa," she whispered, "not sure if this is right, but I'm here." The setting sun painted the gravestones amber as Rebecca mentally rehearsed her speech. She would speak only of honor, sacrifice, and remembrance. That should be neutral enough for anyone, or so she thought. Memorial Day dawned clear and warm. Rebecca dressed carefully in her formal uniform, each button and medal precisely aligned. The Medal of Honor remained at the hotel. Today wasn't about her accomplishments. The town square had transformed overnight. Rows of white chairs faced a stage adorned with bunting and flags. The crowd had already gathered when Rebecca arrived. Conversations hushed briefly as people noticed her. She nodded politely, accepting handshakes, and murmured, "Thanks." Mayor Wesley Jackson, a man in his early 40s with stylishly cut hair and a tailored suit, stood near the podium, talking animatedly with council members. When Martha Collins pointed Rebecca out, the mayor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly before he approached. "Captain Hayes, welcome to our Memorial Day observance." His handshake was firm but brief. "We're honored to have you, of course." "Thank you, Mayor Jackson. It's good to be home." "Yes." "Well," he glanced at his watch. "We'll begin shortly. I'll open with remarks before your speech." The ceremony began with the presentation of colors and national anthem. Rebecca stood at attention, right hand over her heart, her left sleeve empty below the elbow. She felt centered in these familiar rituals, grounded in ways civilian life rarely provided. Mayor Jackson approached the microphone, adjusting it before smiling. "Welcome, citizens of Maplewood, to our annual Day of Remembrance. Today we honor the past while looking toward a more peaceful future." His voice carried confidently, "Maplewood has always valued service and sacrifice, but today I want us to expand our definition of what service truly means." Rebecca listened as the mayor spoke about civic engagement, volunteering, and community activism. All worthy pursuits, she thought. But as his speech continued, she noticed the almost complete absence of any mention of military sacrifice. "While we respect our military traditions," the mayor continued, gesturing vaguely toward the memorial statue, "we must recognize that true patriotism extends beyond battlefield heroics. In today's complex world, we need to emphasize non-militaristic values, especially for our children." He paused, glancing directly at Rebecca. "We have with us today a decorated veteran, and while we honor Captain Hayes' service, I must express concern about the messaging we send impressionable youth when we glorify combat experiences." His voice lowered. "Should our children really be exposed to stories of violence? Such outdated symbols of conflict aren't what Maplewood represents in the 21st century." A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Rebecca sat perfectly still, her expression unchanged thanks to years of military discipline. But inside, disbelief warred with anger. Had the mayor just called her an outdated symbol at a Memorial Day ceremony? The event coordinator, looking mortified, quickly approached the microphone. "Thank you, Mayor Jackson. We now welcome Captain Rebecca Hayes, Medal of Honor recipient." Rebecca rose and walked to the podium with measured steps. She surveyed the crowd, noting uncomfortable expressions, parents holding children closer, and veterans sitting ramrod straight, their faces tight with contained fury. "Good morning," she began evenly. "I'm not here to glorify war. No one who has experienced combat would ever glorify it." She paused, allowing silence to settle. 8 years ago, my unit protected a girls' school in Kandahar province. Those girls walked 3 hours each way for an education their mothers never received. The Taliban had threatened to attack the school. We were there to prevent that. Rebecca kept her voice steady, factual. When the attack came, we held our position. 3 of my closest friends died ensuring those girls could continue learning. Rebecca described each fallen soldier briefly: Captain Michael Rodriguez, who'd left behind twin daughters he would never see grow up; Lieutenant Sarah Khan, whose medical skills had saved countless Afghan civilians before she became a casualty; Sergeant Damon Wallace, who'd carried a wounded child to safety before returning to the fight where he fell. They didn't die for glory or politics, Rebecca continued. They died because they believe that service requires sacrifice, and that some principles are worth defending, even at terrible cost. Those children in Afghanistan still attend that school today. They're becoming doctors, teachers, engineers. That's not militarism. That's possibility. She concluded simply. Memorial Day isn't about celebrating war. It's about honoring those who gave everything so others might live in peace. Thank you. For several seconds, complete silence held the square. Then, beginning slowly and building to a thunderous crescendo, applause erupted. Many stood, including every veteran present. As Rebecca returned to her seat, Mayor Jackson reclaimed the microphone, visibly flustered. Thank you, Captain, for that perspective. Though I maintain that focusing on modern values rather than dwelling on outdated conflicts would better serve our community's future. From the third row, an older woman stood abruptly. Rebecca recognized Mrs. Petrovich, whose son had died in Iraq 15 years earlier. My son is not an outdated conflict, Mayor Jackson, she called out, her voice carrying clearly. And neither is Captain Hayes. My son died alongside soldiers like her. Don't you dare call her outdated. Others murmured agreement, and the mayor's face flushed deep red. The ceremony concluded hastily with the planned wreath-laying proceeding in strained silence. As people dispersed, Rebecca accepted quiet thanks from several attendees, including veterans who promised to make things right. She didn't ask what they meant. She'd said what she came to say. Tomorrow she would return to Colorado and her quiet life. But Maplewood had other plans. By nightfall, cell phone video of the mayor's remarks had spread across social media. Local veterans groups shared it with outrage, tagging organizations in neighboring counties. Text messages and phone calls connected veterans across 3 counties. What began as local indignation transformed into organized action without a single public announcement. Rebecca knew nothing of this as she ate breakfast at her hotel the next morning. She'd planned to catch the afternoon bus back to the airport, perhaps stopping by the cemetery once more before leaving. The previous day's ceremony had left her drained but resolute. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and small-town politics certainly ranked low on her list of priorities. At precisely 10 a.m., as Mayor Jackson arrived at City Hall for his regular Monday meeting, he stopped short at the unexpected sight before him. Lining both sides of the wide steps leading to the building stood veterans. Dozens at first glance. Then he realized there were hundreds, over 400 veterans assembled here from across 3 counties, standing in perfect formation. They wore various uniforms, some dress uniforms, much like Rebecca's from yesterday, others in simple VFW or American Legion caps and jackets. Some sat in wheelchairs. A few leaned on canes. But all stood or sat with military bearing, utterly silent. Their faces bore no anger, carried no protest signs. They simply stood unwavering, service medals glinting in the morning sun. Behind them, civilian supporters maintained respectful distance, witnessing without interfering. A local news crew had already arrived, cameras capturing the extraordinary scene. The reporter counted aloud, over 400 veterans have assembled here from across 3 counties. Mayor Jackson froze, briefcase clutched in suddenly sweaty hands. At the top of the steps, stood Rebecca Hayes, not in uniform today, but in simple civilian clothes. Her expression remained neutral as their eyes met. "What is this?" the mayor asked, his voice uncertain. None of the veterans answered. Their silence spoke volumes. An elderly Marine in a wheelchair rolled forward, his chest bearing decorations from Vietnam. Wordlessly, he extended an envelope to the mayor. Jackson took it, hands trembling slightly as he opened it. Inside was a photograph. It showed Rebecca kneeling beside a simple wooden cross in dusty Afghan soil. Beside her knelt several young Afghan girls in school uniforms, placing wildflowers at the memorial. On the back, someone had written, Lt. Sarah Khan's Memorial, Kandahar. The students visit every year to honor the woman who died for their education. The mayor stared at the photo, then at the assembled veterans who maintained their dignified silence. No chants, no shouting, no demands, just presence. Witness, Rebecca finally spoke, her voice carrying in the hushed morning air. Now you know what honor looks like. The veterans remained motionless as city employees arrived for work, carefully navigating between the silent ranks with expressions of awe or embarrassment. Residents gathered at the perimeter, many bringing water bottles and chairs for the older veterans who steadfastly refused to stand down. Mayor Jackson retreated inside, blinds drawn against the powerful statement being made on his doorstep. From his window, he could see the veteran formations extending around the building, a human wall of silent dignity. 1 hour passed, then another. The veterans never shifted positions. The older ones occasionally accepted water, but no one broke formation. Their discipline was as powerful as their message. Local television stations picked up the story. Social media exploded with images of the silent veterans standing in perfect formation. Comments flooded in from across the country, most expressing support for the veterans and outrage at the mayor's comments. A harried aide rushed into the mayor's office. "Sir, this is getting national attention. CNN just picked it up. We need to make a statement." The mayor stared at the photograph on his desk, the Afghan girls placing flowers at the memorial of a woman who died so they could receive an education. He thought about his own words yesterday, outdated symbols, and militaristic values, and felt a deep, sinking shame. "No statement," he said quietly. "I need to fix this myself." He reached for his phone and made a call. At precisely noon, without any visible signal, the assembled veterans simultaneously rendered a final salute. Then, as quietly as they had arrived, they dispersed. No property had been damaged, no traffic blocked, no angry words exchanged, just a reminder of what respect truly meant. Delivered with quiet dignity. The mayor watched from his window as the last veterans departed. The silence they left behind seemed louder than any protest chant could have been. On his desk lay a manila folder with his hastily scribbled notes for a public apology. But first, he needed to speak with someone privately. As the crowd dispersed, Rebecca stood alone on the steps of City Hall. She hadn't organized this demonstration, hadn't even known it was happening until Martha Collins called her that morning. But seeing these men and women, spanning generations of service, standing together in silent solidarity, had moved her more deeply than she could express. A young reporter approached her cautiously. "Captain Hayes, would you like to make a statement about what happened here today?" Rebecca considered the question. These veterans didn't need words to make their point. "I don't think I do either, but what was their message?" the reporter pressed. Rebecca gazed across the town square where the last veterans were departing. Some helped older comrades into vehicles. Others walked together, united by an unspoken bond that transcended age, rank, and era of service. The message was simple, Rebecca said finally. Respect isn't political. Sacrifice isn't outdated. And those who serve deserve to be honored, not used as political props by either side. As Rebecca walked away, her phone rang. It was the mayor's office, requesting a private meeting that afternoon. She wasn't surprised. The veterans' silent stand had accomplished what angry words never could. They had created space for genuine reflection. Rebecca agreed to the meeting, not seeking apology, but hoping for understanding. Perhaps something meaningful could emerge from yesterday's disrespect. Maplewood's military families deserve better than to be caught in political crossfire. If the mayor was willing to listen now, she would meet him halfway. After all, bridge building had always been part of service, too. Rebecca was packing her small suitcase when the knock came at her hotel room door. Mayor Jackson stood in the hallway, his usual confident posture absent, replaced by a man who looked like he hadn't slept. "May I come in, Captain Hayes?" Rebecca hesitated, then stepped aside. "I was just leaving." "I know. That's why I came. The mayor entered but remained standing awkwardly near the door. I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, Mayor. Please. He raised a hand. Let me finish. What I said yesterday was inexcusable. I disrespected you, your service, and everyone who has sacrificed for this country. He paused, collecting himself. I've spent the last 24 hours thinking about why I said those things. Rebecca crossed her arms, listening. I grew up in the shadow of the Iraq War, he continued. My generation questioned everything about military intervention. I built my identity around challenging traditional patriotism. When you came to town, a literal war hero, it threatened everything I thought I stood for. He shook his head. But that's no excuse. No, Rebecca agreed quietly. It's not. Those veterans today, they didn't shout or threaten. They just stood in solidarity. It was the most powerful statement I've ever witnessed. The mayor met her eyes. I was wrong, Captain Hayes. Not just about you, but about what service and sacrifice mean. Rebecca studied him, searching for insincerity and finding none. So, what happens now, Mayor Jackson? That's why I'm here. The Veteran Center on Elm Street has been closed for budget reasons for 3 years. I'd like to reopen it with community support as a proper resource center. New programs, counseling services, job assistance. Sounds worthwhile. I want you to lead it. Rebecca laughed, genuinely surprised. I don't live here anymore, Mayor. And I'm not looking for a job. We could make arrangements. Part-time advisory role, perhaps. His eagerness seemed genuine. The town needs someone like you, Captain Hayes. Not as a symbol, but as a leader who understands service beyond politics. Rebecca considered the proposal. She'd found purpose in her quiet work with veterans in Colorado. But there was something meaningful about helping rebuild something in her hometown. I won't move back permanently, she said finally. But I could consult, help establish programs under one condition, name it. This can't be about me or you or politics. It has to be about service. All kinds of service. Military, yes, but also community service, education initiatives, cross-generational mentorship. The mayor nodded. That's exactly what Maplewood needs. As Rebecca watched him leave, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Not for herself, but for what might grow from this moment of understanding between two people with fundamentally different perspectives. She picked up the photograph. The elderly Marine had given the mayor, the one he'd just returned to her with his apology, Lieutenant Sarah Khan's memorial in Afghanistan with schoolgirls placing flowers. Rebecca had taken the photo herself on her last visit before retiring from active duty. We got through to him, she whispered to her fallen friend. Not with anger, with dignity. Rebecca carefully placed the photo in her bag. She would miss her afternoon bus now. But that was all right. Perhaps staying a few more days in Maplewood wouldn't be so bad after all. There was work to be done here. Important work. And Rebecca Hayes had never been one to walk away from that. 6 months later, Rebecca returned to Maplewood for the opening of the renovated Veterans and Community Center. The restored building hummed with activity, retired service members mentoring teenagers, a community garden in the back lot, meeting spaces for support groups and employment resources. At the podium, Mayor Jackson surprised attendees with his candor. This center exists because I made a terrible mistake, he began, glancing toward Rebecca, who stood among the crowd rather than on stage. I failed to understand that honoring sacrifice isn't about glorifying war. It's about recognizing that service takes many forms, and all deserve our respect. He detailed the center's mission, bridging divides between generations, providing tangible support to veterans, and creating pathways for young people to find their own ways to serve. Captain Hayes taught me that patriotism isn't about symbols or rhetoric, he concluded. It's about actions, about showing up for each other, especially when it's difficult. After the ceremony, as attendees explored the new facility, a girl of about 12 approached Rebecca hesitantly. "Are you the soldier who protected the girls' school?" she asked. Rebecca nodded. "I was one of many. My mom says, you got hurt so other kids could be safe." The girl studied Rebecca's prosthetic arm with curiosity rather than discomfort. "I think that's really brave." "Thank you," Rebecca replied. But bravery comes in many forms. Sometimes it's standing up for someone who's being bullied or speaking truth even when it's hard. The girl considered this seriously. "I want to be brave like that." "I think you already are," Rebecca said, noting the girl's volunteer badge from the center's youth program. That evening, alone in her childhood home, which she'd finally decided to renovate rather than sell, Rebecca opened the velvet case containing her Medal of Honor. For years, she'd kept it hidden away, uncomfortable with the attention it brought. Tonight, for the first time, she removed it from the case. She hung it in a simple frame beside photographs of her fallen comrades. Not as a monument to herself, but as a reminder of what they had stood for together, of promises kept and principles defended. Rebecca touched the cool metal briefly, then stepped back. The physical scars of war had faded somewhat over the years, though she would always carry her invisible wounds, but the fire that had driven her to serve remained, redirected now toward building rather than defending. Outside her window, Maplewood continued its evening routines. Families walked dogs along tree-lined streets. Teenagers gathered at the old ice cream parlor. And at the Veterans and Community Center, lights still burned as a support group met in the main hall. Rebecca smiled slightly. Perhaps coming home hadn't been a mistake after all. Her grandfather had always told her that true service never ended. It just found new expressions. In its own imperfect way, Maplewood was remembering what respect looked like, and that was worth staying for. Some wounds are visible, others are carried in silence. But real respect means recognizing both and standing up when others stay seated. If you believe that too, comment respect to show you stand for kindness and justice. Don't forget to subscribe to Tala's Strength to spread more heartwarming stories of dignity, sacrifice, and humanity.